This was first noticed by political science professor Richard Hofstadter, who wrote an article called The Paranoid Style in American Politics in November 1964. In those days, conservatives had little political power or influence. Hofstadter's essay appeared around the time that Senator Barry Goldwater, known as Mr. Conservative, lost 44 out of 50 states in the 1964 presidential contest, one of the largest political defeats in American history. At the time, many conservatives believed that international bankers or the Council on Foreign Relations or the United Nations were secretly controlling American politics. They pulled no punches. John Birch Society founder Robert Welch accused President Eisenhower of being either a traitorous communist or the dupe of communists. Today it is mostly liberals, anti-war crusaders, European intellectuals, and paleo-conservatives who truck in conspiracies. Many of these out-of-power activists have come to believe that a small band of neocons have made a puppet of the president, that the collapse of the Twin Towers was an inside job, and so on. Though Hofstadter was writing about what he called the radical right, his words today could best describe the Michael Moore left. Events since 1939 have given the contemporary right-wing paranoid a vast theater for his imagination, full of rich and proliferating detail, replete with realistic cues and undeniable proofs of the validity of his suspicions. The theater of action is now the entire world, and he can draw not only on the events of World War II, but also on those of the Korean War and the Cold War. Any historian of warfare knows it is in good part a comedy of errors and a museum of incompetence. But if for every error and every act of incompetence one can substitute an act of treason, many points of fascinating interpretation are open to the paranoid imagination. In the end, the real mystery, for one who reads the primary works of paranoid scholarship, is not how the United States has been brought to its present dangerous position, but how it has managed to survive at all. So too with the War on Terror. Every error or incompetence in Iraq or elsewhere is produced as evidence of a neoconservative conspiracy. All sense of proportion is lost. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat of Illinois, can casually call America's terrorist holding pens gulags and compare U.S. soldiers to Nazis. He later issued a half-hearted apology. Newsweek magazine alleges that U.S. interrogators flushed a Koran down the toilet, in a spurious claim that touched off riots in Afghanistan. Uncorroborated stories from the Arab press of American atrocities are taken at face value. The paranoid style lives on. What is a myth? The notion that bin Laden is on dialysis, which I treat at length in myth number 3, is one of many myths that have been thrown up in the wake of the horrific attacks of September 11, 2001. In many ways, it is an archetypal myth. It is pleasing to believe. Who wouldn't wish that the arch-terrorist was suffering in a dank cave, his dignity destroyed by a tangle of tubes linking him to a machine? Plausible and hard to check. Like so many urban legends of the War on Terror, it has now been so often repeated that everyone knows it must be true. But it isn't. For our purposes, a myth is a statement of seeming fact about the War on Terror that has become part of the conventional wisdom and is provably false. I have concentrated on myths that are widely believed by fair-minded people and ignored the more fevered and obscure conspiracy theories. I have also ignored contentions involving other people's motives, such as that Bush invaded Iraq to avenge his father, that might well be untrue, but are impossible to test. The many presidential memos that might shed light on the question will not be declassified for decades. Besides, who can say with certainty what drives other people? The real motivation could be unspoken or unknown even to the decision-maker himself. So in this book, we'll stick to what is widely believed, yet provably false. Why myths deserve to die. No myth is harmless, and some are poisonous. One persistent rumor was that Jewish Americans who worked in the World Trade Center were warned to stay home by Israeli intelligence on September 11, 2001. See myth number 6. Anti-Semitism is an old scourge that refuses to die. Indeed, it seems to be refreshed by immigrants from lands where residents are subjected to hateful broadcasts by state-run media. This vile belief threatens American unity in the face of terror, and it is based on a lie, which I hope will be dispatched by this book. Many myths promote anti-Semitic, anti-American, or even anti-Islamic viewpoints while masquerading as fact. Myths can also lead politicians, the press, and the public to take positions based on false evidence, to boldly go in the wrong direction. Judgments based on false or incomplete information can lead to tragedy or disaster, as our friends in the anti-war movement like to remind us about Iraq. So it really matters if terrorism actually is caused by poverty. See myth number 16. Or if Iraq really is another Vietnam. See myth number 8. Because enormous decisions will be made on or against these beliefs. The investigation. When I decided to investigate these myths, I quickly learned that I was wandering in a trackless territory. Few had investigated the half-truths of the right and the left, or made a comprehensive attempt to set the record straight. Several magazines, such as Foreign Policy's excellent Think Again series, and Popular Mechanics' in-depth investigation into the claims of September 11 skeptics, and a few websites, such as Salon.com, and the invaluable Buster of Urban Legends, Snopes.com, have made vital, piecemeal contributions. Yet no book that I could find traced these myths to their sources and definitively debunked them. As any prosecutor knows, it can take a lot of work to establish the truth or falsity of something. Whenever possible, I tracked down eyewitnesses who could speak authoritatively about the events in question. I interviewed CIA station chiefs responsible for funding the Afghan anti-Soviet resistance movement in the 1980s. I sought out Colonel Oliver North and asked him directly about his early warnings about Al-Qaeda. Their answers were surprising but solid. Whenever possible, I went to the scene. I retraced bin Laden's last steps from a meeting hall in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, and then climbed into the cave complexes bin Laden's last known bolt hole up in the White Mountains near Tora Bora. In Baghdad, in 2003, I interviewed Paul Bremer and WMD hunter David Kay in the strange tranquility of the Green Zone. I also traveled to Brussels, Cairo, Dubai, Khartoum, Kuwait City, Kabul, London, New York, Paris, and Washington, D.C. Sometimes it doesn't take a trip around the world to debunk a myth, just a stroll down the street. In government libraries, I surveyed tens of thousands of pages